I think one of the things we have to recognize is that in any work environment, and I really mean any work environment, where human beings working with other human beings, even if you're working in robotics, there is another human being that is going to be at the end of this thing or along the way, whether it's marketing, a boss, or whatever. This is about humans.
Welcome to the Marketing Rapport, a podcast created for and by marketing professionals who seek to better understand their consumers and design unique, personalized experiences that stand out in today's market. In each episode, hosts from Verisk Marketing Solutions connect you to industry thought leaders, practitioners, and experts focused on improving B2C experiences through powerful data-driven insights. It's about how we connect with our consumers and where we can partner together to do it better. This is the Marketing Rapport.
Welcome to the Marketing Rapport. I'm Tim Finnigan, your host today, and I run product marketing at Verisk Marketing Solutions. Well, we just had Kelly Leonard on, did a great job. He's the Vice President of Creative Strategy and Innovation at the Second City. He's the author of the business book called Yes And, whose foundation is about how improv can improve creativity and collaboration. And he's also the host of Getting to Yes And podcast. We had a great business discussion on how improvisation can help business leaders and to improve creativity, can improve critical thinking and solving problems. Hope you guys enjoy the podcast. I am especially excited today because I have the great Kelly Leonard as my guest. Welcome to the podcast, Kelly.
Thank you for having me on the show, Tim.
No problem. Hey, just to level set, could you give some people that may not be familiar with the Second City and what you do for them, just give a quick background overview of sort of where you're at with them and what the Second City does, not only, entertainment wise, but also through business as well.
Yeah, that's right. So the Second City, which most people know, is a comedy and improv theater that has been home to generations of great comedy talent, going all the way back to Mike Nichols and Elaine May and Alan Arkin, through Joan Rivers and Robert Klein and Fred Willard and Peter Boyle, and then Bill Murray, John Candy, Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, through Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert, Tina Fey. I mean, really, it's just a massive list. And yeah, we're known for doing these great comedy shows and discovering a lot of talent, but we also have a school. So we are the largest school of improvisation in the world. And we have a corporate division, Second City Works, that works with Fortune 500 companies primarily, bringing in educational practices in areas of leadership and teamwork and innovation and creativity. We also use our content creation abilities to help them with messaging, both internal and external. So what started as a small cabaret theater on the north side of Chicago in 1959 is now a sort of multi-million-dollar learning and content company. And then I have worked at Second City for almost 35 years. It'll be 35 in October. And I started as a dishwasher in 1988, not as glamorous as it sounds. Hired the same week to wash dishes as a guy named Jon Favreau, who would go on to direct The Mandalorian, among other things. But yeah, so I did that, and then I actually produced Second City. I hired talent. I ran all the theatrical operations from 1992 to 2015, when I wrote a book called Yes And, that did rather well for HarperCollins. It was a business book about how we take what we do and bring those to businesses. And now I do all of it. I'm really in a unique position in which I get to still be very creative and hands-on inside, working with some of the young artists in the shows that we do, but also on the speaking circuit. I host a podcast, and I help come up with new business ideas for the company. So, first part of the career, improvisation on stage. Second part of the career, improvisation primarily off stage.
So Kelly, I also started as a dishwasher out of college, and I'm like, wait, this is what my college education gave me, but our paths went a little different. As I told you, I took some classes at Second City as well. And what I really, looking back on it, is like, you don't need to take classes there to try to be funny. Some of the classes there, it's about thinking faster on your feet and how to, handle crowds or, leadership styles. If you could touch on that, and you mentioned in your book, and for the listeners, I'm actually holding up his book, Yes And, right here. Go get it. It's a great book. Just touch on how improvisation is sort of related to business. I think in the book, you talk about business as one big act of improvisation.
Sure. So in our school, the core program, where we have a beginning program and a conservatory program, we have lots of other stuff where we teach comedy and writing and acting and different things. But the core thing that we teach is improvisation because it is elemental to human beings coming together in groups and making something out of nothing. So yeah, we all get that in a theatrical context. I think many of us get that in a startup context, right? So when I talk to many people who are involved in startups, they totally get the idea that, oh, if you want to learn how to do a startup, put on a show because you have to, you got to figure out where the script is coming from and how do you rehearse the actors and how do you market this thing? What do you call it? Where are you going to put it on? That's very much true to startup culture. But then think more broadly, what are we doing anytime we enter inside a business? And I think what science is showing us, and increasingly my work has led me to work with academics, and very specifically a program we led for 4 years at the Booth School of Business called the Second Science Project. What behavioral science shows us is that human beings don't normally make great decisions for themselves. Their default position is to say no or do nothing. And improvisation, and if you just look at the concept of yes and, is a nudge to do that differently. So the idea in yes and is that if people are prone to say no, you teach them a practice in which they don't just say yes, they say yes and. They affirm and contribute in order to explore and heighten. And we're not talking like you don't do that all day. You do that for 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of a brainstorm. You do that as an impulse, your immediate impulse in terms of hearing an idea. Because here's the deal, like no innovative idea ever sounded sane to someone. By definition, it hasn't been done before and therefore seems like it's not doable. So really smart innovators create a space where wild ideas can exist, where failures can happen, where you take advantage of mistakes. And improvisation, all these sort of embodied exercises that allow you to try that stuff out because it is not natural to our instincts as human beings, where we are like seeking comfort, not discomfort. We are seeking people who look like us, not people who are different than us. And then when we work in business, it's like, oh, no, you got to do all the other stuff. And no, you were never trained in this because school, God forbid, would ever do that. They're not actually going to teach you anything that you use when you get to work. And so that's what we do. And I think so many people who, like yourself, found themselves in classes, maybe didn't end up on stage at Second City or onto Saturday Night Live. But what they did was say, oh, I actually can use all that stuff in my romantic relationships, in my experience as a parent, and most certainly in my experiences as a coworker, or as a leader, or as a business person.
Right. And Kelly, just to react with some of the things you're saying about creating something out of nothing, it's like, even if you think to like what I do at my company is maybe create a marketing campaign or roll out a new product or a new product line, you have those same sort of things. And I love when you talk about quantitative skills versus soft skills. And sometimes soft skills are maybe thought of like, oh no, that's not as good as these other ones. But if you could just talk about that, and you touch on in the book, willingness to listen and how important listening is.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the World Economic Forum or any of those sort of think tanks, when they do their future of work stuff, and they do that every year, what are the future of work skills? And if you look at them, they are going to be, and it's a terrible term. Soft skills is a terrible term, but they are things like problem solving, storytelling, creativity, agility, resilience. And those are all the things that an improviser is practicing. The reality is, in almost any job, you can teach someone rote skills. You can teach them like, hey, here's our product. This is what it is. This is what we think it's good for. But it is much harder to teach that person than how do you persuade a client to then want to work with you? How do you build a relationship? And all the things I learned as a business person in my time at Second City were those. They were like, okay, I need to tell a good story, and I need to have people want to work with me. And I have to also be a bit fearless in terms of offering an idea in a room that might seem, odd. And also, and that, again, we don't necessarily in the core programs teach comedy. It leads to comedy because improvisation tends to lead to truth, and truth is often funny, especially a surprising truth. And so if you can become really skilled at this work, you can then have that superpower of also like be funny in a room. And I mean, like people want to be with people who make them laugh. And listening, of course, is huge in all of this because frankly, we as human beings are terrible listeners. Nick Epley, who's one of the scientists that we work with at the Second Science Project, his research is all about this. It's about the fact that we tend to get it right roughly 20% of the time, maybe 30% of the time, tops. That is what we are getting right in a room when we are communicating. And that's, quite frankly, that's fine. That is enough to make sure that we're not colliding into each other. But what it isn't is enough for us to gain huge ground. And so the ability to not just listen to the words that are being said in a room, but listen to what is the intent behind those words, what is maybe the meaning of a thing that is being not said, and then how is what is being said affected by the other people in the room. When you can, I just read a book by Marcus Collins, who is at Wieden and Kennedy, and he's a professor at the University of Michigan. And he has a whole section on the fact that comedians are the most incredible marketing people because they get it. They're truth tellers, and they see what's going on in a room that other people aren't saying, and they'll bring it up, and they have such incredible observational skills that they can sort of replay things. And the audience, of course, is picking, this is the reason they're laughing, is because they're recognizing the truth in what this person is saying. So that all starts with listening. That all starts with deep, others-focused listening. And it is crucial to understand that we can talk about this all we want, but if we are not practicing this, and in particular, embodied practice, which is what improvisation is, so you feel what's going on, that you're not going to get better at it. You're not just like, it's not magic. People aren't magically good at this. They're well practiced.
I like what you said about how comedians do well in sales or marketing because they get it, and it's about storytelling. And that's, I think storytelling in my company comes up all the time. Like, okay, how can we tell this story better? And it's not something that you can just say, oh, let's be a great storyteller. There's some skills that you need to do and listen and all that. So going back to when you talked about you work with, companies and businesses, I know I've seen that you work with Farmers Insurance to Nike to Google. What are some of the things or common themes that companies are coming to you or coming to the Second City Works and asking for help with?
Well, the big one right now is that no one knows how to talk to each other. We've got like 6 different generations in the workplace for the first time. And it was like we're never necessarily good at talking to each other, but at least there was, some level of charades that we could, get by with. And right now, everyone's talking past each other. And not just that it's become a little bit dangerous and a little bit scary because people are worried about, the escalation that happens now inside companies. And I know this happens I'm married to a college professor. I know it happens in academia. I'm friends with college professors. It's happening everywhere from the Ivies to the community colleges. It's happening in businesses where you will have what would be a very normal sort of disagreement or problem you can't get by. And then suddenly someone has written to the chairman of the board. And you're like, wait a sec, what happened? And so this idea of, can we come in, or can people ask us this, our clients ask us this, like, what can you do to come in and get our people to find commonality, find ways to communicate? And there are many different exercises that allow individuals to recognize what's the power dynamic in this particular situation. How are the words that I'm saying, when I use the word should, that is very different from using the word could. And just understanding that someone can receive the thing that you're saying very differently than how you meant it to be received. And that doesn't, that's not necessarily their responsibility. Like if your job is to effectively communicate, then you really have to make sure they're hearing the thing that you want them to hear, not the thing you don't want them. I would think you don't want them in fear. You don't want them feeling that a punitive action is going on.
Right.
So this idea of replacing blame with curiosity inside these conversations. So, we're not hearing each other. Let's figure out why. Let's ask each other questions. And this is also a big thing in all of this, which is grounded. Everything needs to be grounded in specifics. We take this way too much for granted. Epley's work speaks to the fact that human beings don't really think that other people want to hear these specifics about ourselves. They might be bored by it. That is untrue, patently untrue. Tell me if you got a dog, I want to know if you got a dog. What music do you like? All these things help me understand who you are. They ground me in seeing you as a human being with a mind and a soul and not just like, okay, boomer. It doesn't need to be just okay, boomer. It can be way more than that.
That's funny. And as you're talking, remind me, my wife told me a story about she had some new leadership happening at work. And she said they did something refreshing. That they said, let's take a step back. Everyone create a slide. I know we're all tired of PowerPoint slides, but let's everyone create a slide and tell us about yourself. Like how you like to be talked to, like how you like to deal with people. And my wife's like, I like to be dealt with directly. So if you have a problem or issue, talk to me directly. But to your point is that maybe some people have different ways, but when in likes and dislikes, but it's good to get down to the foundation of like, this is how I like to be communicated with, or this is how we can, and let's stop with all this. He said, she said, let's just communicate. It's a good point.
Yeah, we had when we first started the program at University of Chicago, and we were all starting with this inkling that when you combine improvisation and behavioral science, interesting things could happen, and they did. And the very first day, we led the scientists through the yes and exercise. So this is a classic exercise in our field. I'll just really quickly describe it. We pair people up and we sort of say, the thing that we all attended today was so successful, we're having a reunion in a year. Person A, you're going to pitch to person B the reunion party idea. Whatever you want, sky's the limit on this thing. Person B, your job is to say no in as many different ways as possible to everything this person says. Do that for a minute. And that ain't fun, certainly for person A. It shouldn't be fun for person B. It is sometimes. And then we have them reverse. Person B pitches. Person A has to respond, yes, but, to every idea. And an interesting thing happens after we debrief that part of the exercise. Half the room thinks it's better. Half the room thinks it's worse. And what we say is, yeah, you heard a yes. That's very gratifying. But the but it makes it like, a no with a top hat. This is not a yes. So, and many people feel like that is the way that they normally communicate inside businesses. And then the third leg of this exercise is where everyone yes ands. They just say yes and every idea. They build on it. So by the end, people are having sushi on the moon, and we're like, yeah, that feels very good. That is what it's like to generate a lot of ideas, which you need to if you're trying to come up with something that's new. And the scientists were all like, we have so much research that backs this up. We don't need to do new studies. But they had a question. What about when we can't yes and the person across from us? What if we need to stay inside this conversation? They're a colleague, they're a friend, they're a family member, but we fundamentally don't agree and we can't yes and. What do? And we have a paper coming out next year about this because we found a very effective fourth leg of the yes and exercise, and it's called thank you because. And what you do is when you disagree with someone, you say thank you for what they just said, which sets off the gratitude part of their brain so they're not in fight or flight. And the because is crucial. The because is you find something, I don't care how small it is, of value in what that person said. So the example I always use on this, because it was true for us, our daughter was sick. One of her best friend's parents were anti-vax, and this is well before that became fashionable. And we wanted the kids to be able to stay in touch, but it was going to be a problem. And so I used this. I said, thank you, because you care for your girls so much, you don't want her hurt by vaccines. I care so much for my girl, I don't want her hurt by someone who's unvaccinated. We care about the same thing. We care about our girls. And the kids found a way to FaceTime and text and stay in touch, and we stayed friendly with the parents. And it was like, look, yeah, we don't agree. We didn't need to make this political. We didn't need to make it anything. We just had to find a commonality that allowed us to move together. And so the reason the paper is taking so long is our initial studies, which were with thousands and thousands and thousands of people, were that they both did thank you because, and then we had an idea that even if one person did the thank you because and the other didn't, it would still work. And so far that appears to be the case. So this should come out next year and get published.
Great. I can't wait for it. Going back to yes and, I really like the concept of it because you go into the book and you talk about if you say no to someone right away, you're saying no to the person and no to the idea. And therefore they're like, it's almost like they internalize it and they're going to come up with less ideas, or they're not going to want to speak up. And there goes collaboration and innovation. If you could just touch on the sort of what happens when you don't do something like yes and.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to recognize is that in any work environment, and I really mean any work environment where human beings working with other human beings. Even if you're working in robotics, there is another human being that is going to be at the end of this thing or along the way, whether it's marketing, a boss, or whatever. This is about humans. And when humans feel invalidated, when they feel not seen, they don't do good work. They find it harder to collaborate. There's a cognitive toll. There's a health toll on this kind of stuff. So it is crucial that we use pro-social methods when we're working with our colleagues. And one of them is this idea of, okay, if I can yes and you, even if ultimately we don't go with your idea, you have had input. And my friend Michael Norris, who's a Harvard professor, has a concept he calls the IKEA effect. And he's done this study, which is that human beings who feel that they had a role or a part in making something put a lot more value on that thing. Something like 35 to 40% increased value on the thing that they feel that they had a part in, which actually made, when I read the study, I'm like, oh, this is what happens at Second City, right? We do this third act of improvisation where we come to the audience for suggestions, and they feel like they're a part of, and they were part of making the show. So it's like, oh, okay, I didn't even realize we do that. It's fundamental to the success of this almost 65-year-old organization. And it is fundamental to the story of IKEA. I mean, part of the reason that thing worked in certain cultures, not all cultures, but certainly in our culture here, is that people felt that because they had to put that thing together, that it meant something more to them. Now, that wasn't always the case in Asian cultures, which I discovered, and they made pivots, and that's fine. But primarily, I think we're speaking to a North American audience, and we want to have our hands in things. That's part of our culture.
And especially now, you had mentioned about employees having more engaged employees or having them be more inventive and have them be quicker to solve problems. And you get to that through yes and is a win in of itself. So I want to pivot a little to how yes and some of these theories, practice theories can help with like leadership style. You have a great saying. It's when you go to a meeting, bring a brick, not a cathedral. If you could just touch on that. I love that saying.
Yeah, I think many of us enter a lot of conversations and meetings already with the cathedral intact. We have the idea of the thing that we want to accomplish or do, and that immediately will shut down. Sunil Gupta, who is a friend, he wrote a terrific book called Backable. So for people who don't know Sunil, he's the CEO of the Rise app, which is a very successful thing that he sold, and he's a serial entrepreneur and a media figure. And he has a great story in his book about a primatologist by the name of George Schlatter. And George was working in Africa in the 50s, and he was renowned for getting closer to the apes and being able to get an incredible amount of data because he could get so close to them and they just weren't afraid of him. And he was at a conference and a woman raised their hand. They're like, how do you do this? No one else is able to get this close. And he said, oh, it's easy. I don't carry a gun in my backpack. And I always love that because I'm like, it's not that he didn't just carry a gun in his holster. He didn't even have one in his backpack because the suggestion there, and I know this is true from my experience, is that we know when you have a gun in the backpack. We know when there is a threat. So that the apes can sense it and human beings can sense it. So this idea of being able to enter a room and I do not have a gun in my backpack, what I am entering in with is I want to hear your ideas. I want your input. It is going to make me excited. Let's get this up on the whiteboard. And by the way, give me your worst ideas possible. I don't want you because this is what we do as human beings. We're in judgment of self or we're in judgment of others, and that stands in the way of creativity. You cannot be creative if you are in judgment of self or judgment of others. Full stop. This is a thing we are brought in to teach at Harvard every year in Francesca Gino's class, and that core principle was that when she learned that as a core principle of improvisation, she's like, please, every class you come in, you got to hammer that home. Because what she knows, especially with the kids who are going to Harvard, is they are so judgmental, yes, of others, but almost worse, of self. And that inhibits their ability to contribute. Because, like, not every idea that comes out of your mouth is going to be great, but it's the accumulation of all those not great ideas that are going to lead to the great idea. That's how this works. So it's everyone contributing all their ideas, feeling free to fail, free to look a little foolish. And then it also creates a sense of play, which also is crucial inside creativity.
Right. If you just go back to, and I think I've been there recently too, not just when I was younger, but when you're in a meeting or you're somewhere and someone asks a question and you know the answer, but you don't answer it, you don't raise your hand. It's almost like that fear of failure. And it's not a safe space. That's a bad way to say it. But if you're open and you're accepting of ideas, you can build on that and overcome that fear, because I would think fear of failure was like a creativity killer. Like,
Yeah,
we
exactly.
need to get into a spot. Perfect.
Yeah.
So,
No. I mean, the beginning classes at Second City are almost exclusively attacking fear, and our fear of speaking up in public, our fear of what we talked about in terms of like looking foolish and that sort of thing. So they are just, there's probably 25, 30, 40, 50 exercises that are really just about that, and getting people to practice this and practice this and practice this so that we can move to the advanced stuff. But if you don't work on that first, if you don't recognize that that is a thing that everyone's walking into this room with, then you're never going to get the good stuff out of your group.
so when I would think when you go to a corporation or you're trying to help them, there's always that one guy in the back of the room with his arms folded saying, if I said yes and to every horrible idea, I'd get nowhere. How do you overcome those objections?
I don't know that you do with them. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the sad reality no one ever wants to admit, which is there are many situations in where things just aren't going to work. If you have a boss who is a jerk and isn't interested in these ideas, leave. It is not going to get better no matter what you do. It is like a bad marriage. Get out. And that one guy in the back of the room, yeah, we can try to convince him, or we can be like, no, let's focus on the rest of the folks who are really interested in maybe learning something today. This is the tough thing with these business books. I wrote one, I get it, but I probably read 2 to 3 books a week, and a lot of them are business books. And a lot of people are promising, like, this is the 7 steps to absolutely crushing it at work. And this is all the 10 things you need to know to be successful in your life or business, right? None of that is true. Like, maybe some stuff in there is good, great. And then some stuff from my book is great. And then some stuff from another. What you want to do is accumulate a very wide toolbox to draw on in the myriad contexts that you're going to be confronted with at work. And that's just getting worse. I mean, it is, the speed of technology. Again, we've talked about the multiple generations in the workplace, the speed of technology, the amount of information that is being thrown at us, the changing competitive landscape, there was a point where, I mean, Netflix just stopped mailing out DVDs. And I know that feels like they did that a while ago, but now officially it's not. Like, I remember when that was the thing. That was all it was. There was no streaming, and now there's streaming. So all this stuff is coming at you. And to have your people remain agile and be able to process all this stuff means we have to focus in on those dreaded soft skills. If we're not equipping our people to handle information overload, we are making just a very deep mistake. And what I know is there are, I will say, because I've been doing this work for a while, in the last 5 years, and it's before COVID, but even more so since COVID, there is a sea change in these sort of learning areas of company where they are absolutely recognizing that they have to pay attention. And they're using terms like mental health. And they're not wrong. Mental health is a real thing. I've dealt with it. Everyone I know has dealt with it. But I also think that and right before we started taping, I said there's a thing I've been thinking on. This is the thing I've been thinking on, which is people keep talking about things like, wow, the loneliness epidemic and the mental health crisis. And I get it. I do not want to negate that. I believe in those things. Is there a chance that what people are picking up on is an absolutely rational response to what is in front of them, which is a world that looks on fire, which is young people going to schools not knowing if they're going to be shot or not, which is people having to pay off exorbitant student loans or thinking they're never going to pay those off, or wondering what it means to have meaning or purpose at work, or everyone talking about the fact of like, well, we can never go back to like in office, and then you have companies saying you have to come back in office. I mean, it is a complex time in the world of work. And I think for a young person, and, I'm a dad, I'm a parent to young people, I have a lot of sympathy for what they're facing because it didn't feel like I was facing those things when I was entering the workplace at all.
No, and I agree with you. And my kids are a little older. My oldest is just graduating college and has just got her first job. And it's, you start thinking of all those things like, oh, now my child is going to be in the corporate life, and like, they're going to teach her quantitative skills. Are they like some of those soft skills of working with a jerk or working with a bad boss, or all those things that, you need to learn. And that's one of the things I loved. Another plug about your book is that you tell a great story, but it's rooted in truth as far as real life stories and business stories. And people want to understand on how to solve problems and how to brainstorm and ideate better, how to communicate with your team better, and leadership skills. So your book definitely touches on those. And I don't know if I'll get her to read it. Maybe I'll have to, summarize it and have her download it, or I can't even get her to listen to my podcast, let alone read a book. So
my son doesn't listen to my podcast either. So, that seems on par.
So Kelly, if I could just have you tell one more story before you leave, and thank you for spending so much time. I saw you when you did your TED speeches, you talked about, wouldn't it be great if nice and funny equals popularity? Could you just touch on that story real quick?
Yeah. So about, I don't know, like how long ago was it now? 15 years ago, I was in my office at Second City and I was cleaning up, and it was a Friday and it was the summer. And my son, Nick, who was 10 at the time, was finishing up his first week of improv classes. And the thing you need to know about Nick at that time was that he was chubby. He has weird theater parents, so he was kind of this weird theater kid. And he got bullied at school. And we're trying to deal with it in all the ways that one tries to deal with these things. And we're pretty hands-off parents in terms of like, all right, let's see if everyone can, this can get figured out. But this week he's loving it. He's on fire. And we get in my car and we're leaving Piper's Alley here in Chicago. And he says to me from the backseat, "Dad, do you know what I love about improv?" And I go, "No, buddy, what do you love about improv?" And he goes, in improv, if you're nice and you're funny, you're popular." And that, I tell this story almost every speech I give, I open with it. And I do that for a couple different reasons. One is that it's never left me. It's a thing I still think about today when I think about, why do I get up in the morning and come to work? And that's the reason. But also, it's rooted in some of the science that I've learned about over time. And one of those things is that if you want people to pay attention to you, if you want to influence them, if you want to be persuasive, you have to be vulnerable. And also, people want to know your struggle. So great leaders are not notorious for talking about all the things they do right. Great leaders know how to talk about struggle. And this is what Churchill did. This is what FDR did. This is what Kennedy was sort of speaking to when he was talking about what potentially we could accomplish and what that would mean in hardship for people, everyone having to sort of, participate. And so for me, when I want to get people to be like, why is the guy who hired Tina Fey here? It's like, yeah, well, I've got a good eye for talent, but also I've learned some things over time, and those are about my work, but they're also about me as a human being, as a worker, as a young leader, and then as a more experienced leader, and working with, top level talent. And it's not like top level talent is easy to work with. They aren't, but there are things you can do and practices that we can talk about that will allow you to not just retain talent. Retaining talent's great. You want people to stay with you, but maximize their productiveness, maximize what their dreams might be. So when you can understand what your people want and understand what they're dreaming and those sort of things, and if you can give them space to maybe accomplish that dream, you don't just have a happy employee, you sort of have like a lifelong friend. And I feel that way, so that when Stephen Colbert comes back to town and we end up in conversation, it's like he never left. And that's in part because our values are so aligned in terms of what he could do to make me better at my job, what I could do to make him better at his job. And, and Stephen, has done incredible things, but he is also someone who has deeply rooted in the philosophy of improvisation, and he takes it with him both in the way he conducts himself as a leader inside his job that he does day to day, and not just the job that you see as with him as a television host, but how he treats the people he works with backstage. So my work has been, in improvisation. I believe life is improvisation, and I think everyone would benefit from knowing how to improvise a little bit better in their day to day.
Kelly, thank you. I couldn't have said it better. Talk about making my job better. This definitely did it. Again, a plug for Kelly's book and his podcast. For all the business leaders that are out there looking to how to better deal with unplanned and unexplained and unexpected things that come up, high pressure situations, changing circumstances, yes, and improvisation will be able to help you. So Kelly, again, thanks for taking some time, and hopefully we can talk soon again. And I want to talk to you when your new paper comes out. Thank you, bud.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Marketing Report. This show is brought to you by Verisk Marketing Solutions, an organization created to help CMOs and their partners improve the reach, timing, relevance, and compliance of every consumer engagement. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to the Marketing Report wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the show notes for more information.